On global technology trends for 2020. So my name is Kimberly, I'm the head of marketing for FCM Travel, and joining us today is Flight Centre's Guru Chief Experience Officer, John Morehouse. Welcome, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good. We're very excited to have you joining us today as we dive into the trends that will shape travel technology for 2020 and beyond. John is the Chief Experience Officer for Flight Centre Group's global business travel brands and our resident tech guru. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience in client-facing innovation and digital mobile platforms, and has a fascinating insight into global tech trends and how these shape the way we travel. We're really looking forward to hearing John's predictions for what's in store for 2020. So without further delay, I'll hand over to John, who will start today's presentation.
Well, thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate everyone being here. For the topic today that we're going to talk about are the global technology trends, specifically in business travel, that we need to look at for 2020. I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about how we come about spotting trends, how we actually look for the indicators of different technology trends in the overall market. And the thing that I talk to people about to really understand where different parts of technology are going are simply following the money. If you look at the amount of venture capital investment that's went into the travel industry in the last couple of years, which you can see by the chart here on the screen, we've seen a significant growth, almost 100% compounding annual growth rate happening in terms of venture capital funding going into travel and mobility technology. In 2018, we're seeing that number hit nearly $43 billion in terms of venture capital that's going directly into the industry. What that tells us is that this is a very ripe market, very disruptive market. It's an area that the venture capital industry believes can be changed with new business models, new technology platforms, new types of services that can really improve the overall travel and mobility technology space. What you're starting to see, though, however, is a bit of signs that we're starting to see some softening and peaking of the market. So if I actually draw this line out to some of the trends that we're seeing in 2019 and forecasting that over into 2020, you're starting to see a little bit of softening. A lot of that's happening in Asia, and a lot of that's happening because of where the money is going with some of the different companies, and I'll talk to that in the next slide. But I did want to highlight that if you actually look at this historical investment number and some of the historical figures that are there, a majority of the cash that happens from the VC perspective are really going into two specific verticals. One is booking technology, and the second is AI and artificial intelligence. And those have really been the two standout categories within the overall venture capital investment space in the travel and technology area that I really want to go through and highlight. Now, in terms of where and some of the companies that are out there, you know, there's a variety of different organizations from a venture perspective that are putting cash into the overall industry. You're seeing a lot of them here listed on the actual screen as US-based organizations, ordered by the number of investments that they've done. And a couple things I'd go through and actually highlight and really draw your attention to is that if you look on the investments that have actually happened on the right-hand side, the largest amount of investment have went into ride-sharing services. So you're seeing the Ubers, the Grabs, the DiDis, the BlaBlaCars. There's a variety of different types of either ground transportation providers or ground aggregation providers. They have really taken the lion's share of some of the investment that's out there, but you're also equally seeing new types of different accommodation services. You're seeing different types of booking platforms. There's a whole host of different varieties that are out there. One thing I also would highlight is the number one ranked investor, Plug and Play, is actually a partner of Flight Centre's. And if we actually talk through some of the various things that we're doing in the industry, they play a pretty key part of it. So as we talk about how some of those players are driving the next generation of innovation, we wanted to go through three individual areas of that. First and foremost, highlighting some of the active investments that are happening in the overall space, and really talking about what Flight Centre is doing in that space as well. So in the Flight Centre landscape, as we look at this macro change of a lot of venture capital going into business travel, we've been not shy about making our own investments as well. Some of the notable ones that we've done on the screen are listed here. 30 Seconds to Fly and Claire are an AI-based booking platform that we leverage in a couple of different markets globally. We've also made investments in applications that you may be using today. So any one of our customers that are using our SAM mobile app, we previously owned 25% of the SAM business. We increased that to 100% this current calendar year. And lastly, one of the largest investments that we've made overall in the technology area was with the Upside Travel Company, an investment that we did primarily for our SME business, where we are now 25% shareholder of a new booking type platform for our the SME industry channel. But in addition to our own investments to help drive some of the different types of innovation that we're seeing in the market, we're also spending a lot of time with our industry partnerships. On the last slide, I talked about our relationship with Plug and Play. Plug and Play is an incubation company, meaning that their role in the overall ecosystem is to go out and find very early stage companies in the startup space and help them grow into successful businesses, whether that's by providing venture capital, which you saw through the last slide, but it's also providing HR services, different types of advisory services, everywhere from procurement assistance and things of that nature. We spend a lot of time working with them. We're one of the ecosystem partners on their travel vertical, and spend a lot of time looking at different types of companies in the travel space, and it really plays a key part of our overall innovation story as it comes to the industry and the travel industry at large. But they're not the only one that we partner with. We also partner with BTN, the Business Travel News Network, Voyager HQ, which is another one that does some of the incubation based more in the US market. We drive and look at industry and lead industry thought leadership through our events like Illuminate. We also participate in different types of broad-based technology industry events in the travel overall ecosystem like Focusrite. So there's a lot that we're doing on the investment side within our own business, both in putting cash into various types of startups that are out there, and then working through trying to identify new startups and new types of relationships in the industry to help keep pace with all the different types of innovation that's out there. But we're also doing that internally as well, and we're doing that not just through startups, but also with some of our partners. So we also wanted to highlight that in the past couple of years, we've become one of the largest users of the Serco platform. And as a result of that, we've actually co-developed and co-created a custom version of Serco called Savvy that we offer to the market that many of you are looking at or potentially using. And that is a similar type of investment where through our relationship with Serco, we've got a co-investment fund of trying to build unique functionality and different types of exclusive features specifically to Flight Centre customers and our various brands. So not all types of next-gen innovation and investment have to necessarily come through startups. They can come through established players and working with them in a unique and different way. And like I mentioned last few slides, one of the areas of the industry where you're seeing a lot of highlight in this space is around the online booking tool platform providers, where we are starting to see an influx of new providers come in. But the question you need to start asking yourself is what kind of problem they're looking to solve. Any given day, we have several of these providers that happen to pop up from a competitive landscape, but they're all roughly trying to solve the same problem in different ways, and really trying to find uniqueness in those solutions is where the industry is starting to move towards. But innovation and technology investment are not the only things to have to worry about from a trend standpoint. There's a lot other components happening in the macro landscape of the travel industry. From a content perspective, as we see on the left-hand side, there are massive changes happening in the content arena. So NDC, the new distribution capability, which you're starting to see in markets such as Australia with Qantas, are driving new different types of ways of purchasing airline inventory and distribution through various channels. And that is changing and impacting several different types of supplier relationships and purchasing behaviors of airlines in a variety of different markets globally. We're also seeing new entrants in the hotel space, whether it be hotel aggregation providers or some of the on-demand or sharing providers that are out there. And also, as I mentioned before, we're seeing a tremendous shift in the ground transportation space, a decline in rental cars traditionally, and a lot more sharing car services that are emerging in a variety of industries. It's several that are out there. Obviously, our partnership and relationship with Uber being one of the largest ones that's out there. We're also seeing a lot of investments in the macro environment around AI capability. We are starting to see all sorts of new AI-powered technologies. At one of the Illuminate events previously, I spoke about how AI is involved in every part of our life, and even little things we don't realize, like our Facebook feed, which is now powered by AI technology to help drive what new news content and posts from your friends you should be seeing. that trend is happening across the board, and everything from your Amazon searches to your Netflix selection. AI is powering all sorts of different technology components as we start to look at its impact across the overall ecosystem, and really starting to be a major factor in new type of technology capability that we're starting to leverage across the board. But some of the stuff is actually happening now. It's not so much a trend to look forward to in 2020. We would like to highlight things like SAM and our capabilities that we're adding to SAM, primarily around booking capabilities, which we're doing in combination with Savvy. We've also released some new travel arranger features and functionality that came out in the last few weeks to allow customers that have a lot of travel bookers and travel arrangers to be able to do those types of things within the actual application itself. And also on the changing landscape side, servicing is starting to be a big deal, and we've had some initiatives with Salesforce to help bring some automation to that component as well. So there's a lot of things happening overall in the changing landscape of technology and different service propositions that are out there. One thing I will highlight is specifically as we wrap up in a little bit and talk about different types of trends and really the overall traveler journey as being probably the single largest trend to look forward to in 2020 is really trying to simplify the book and pay process. And this is really something that we're quite focused on across the board through our various products and services and our various brands. But it's something that the industry at large is also recognizing as well. Because if you look at the travel process that a person would go through from a business travel perspective, there's been a lot of improvements from a venture perspective, both on the VC side and with established players, on improving that search and book capability and making that process a lot easier. But the search and book part of an overall user journey is just one stage of all the different facets that a person goes through. And as you start to look at all those different components, one part that's really becoming quite fragmented is the payment side of it. So having a simple way to use a central payment service for everything that you do, both flights, cars, hotel, and now with on-demand services, with our relationship with Uber, the ability to have different types of credit cards and different types of on-demand allocation of credit cards to be able to control budgetary and spend limits for your traveling employees. We're starting to see all different types of new payment methodologies becoming more common. So virtual credit cards, tap payments, which are starting to make their way into larger parts of the markets overall, becoming more and more commonplace as an accepted form of payment, which really makes it a lot easier to handle automation of the payment flow through approvals and different types of booking workflows, as opposed to the more traditional means of just handing out a corporate card and trying to lock down the various types of merchants that can be used for the card, and then having employees reconcile expenses afterwards. And then lastly, like I just mentioned, having approval and all different types of service workflows that cover that full process are also quite critical. So we're starting to see more technologies and more industries and businesses focus on really end-to-end workflows for their travelers. And the example that I use here that we're starting to see in a couple of different markets is if I'm a traveler going on a business trip and I have an approval to travel, let's say I'm going from Brisbane to Sydney for a couple of days and coming back afterwards, why do I then need approval for the expenses that get incurred as part of that trip if I already have approval for the trip to begin with and I've got sufficient restrictions on where my card can and cannot be used? And really more progressive companies that are really focused on trying to improve the overall experience for their employees are starting to wonder, why can't that be the exact same process? Why do I have to make my staff go through an approval flow to travel to begin with, and then go through an approval flow for the expenses they incurred while traveling? Why can't I streamline that into a single system? And we're starting to see a new crop of technology players, new crop of card players, and new crop of booking tools that can start to support certain technologies like that. So as we look forward towards 2030, I think I've discussed a variety of different trends that are out there, but I'll just talk about a few more that are also out there as well. First and foremost, like I mentioned before, I think we're going to start to see a very, very strong focus on the end-to-end traveler journey. Everybody will be looking at all the different phases that are out there and really trying to find ways to make the overall process much simpler. Not just the search and book process, not just how AI can help augment some of those different parts of the process, but really what happens when I find out that I have to travel? What do I do in search and book? What do I do when I'm on the trip? What do I do when I have a disruption? What do I do when I get back? Making sure all those different flows are tied into an actual cohesive stream of events, and make sure that in some of those situations where I need human support, I've got the ability to very easily and quickly contact my consultant to get some assistance into those situations that the actual system can't resolve with itself. Also, one major trend, like I just spent a little bit of time talking about, are payments. We're starting to see a tremendous amount of activity and different types of new innovative features available in the payment space that classically have not been there before. So the ability to have different types of credit cards deployed on demand, the ability for individual finance people at businesses to set and restrict limits on cards on demand on a per trip basis when people are traveling, are really starting to help change the landscape of what payments can look like. And those types of things, married with tap and pay and various types of advancements in how we actually accept payment at various providers, are really starting to pave the way for change in that area. One thing that we're also seeing as a big trend is really an increased focus on what I'd call traveler well-being. And that really comes in two forms, both the health of the traveler while they're on the trip and the safety of the traveler while they're on the trip. Safety is obviously quite paramount, and most companies are starting to recognize that they have a very strong responsibility in the duty of care cycle, and there's a variety of tools that we offer in that space, but companies need help understanding how those pieces are there. But health of the traveler while they're on the trip is also becoming a larger focus item as well. And really, people are starting to think about what I can do to make this process easier for people that are always on the road, that are always traveling, those road warriors that are out there, because employers are starting to realize that the most difficult asset they have, or the most valuable asset they have in their business, and the one that's most difficult to replace, is the actual employee. And things like travel start to become a competitive differentiator when a potential employee is looking for 4 or 5 different jobs in terms of where they would like to work. And if I've got an offer at 2 different places and they're relatively the same compensation and same type of role, but one allows for business travel and one allows for domestic travel, then it's going to be a pretty easy decision for me as to which one's better to go through and take. Content and distribution, one key change that's happening. This in some markets is very short term with things like NDC and some of the examples I mentioned before. In other markets, it's taken a bit more of a long-term play and maybe a little bit more of a longer type of solution that comes out. But this is dramatically changing how content from a product standpoint in terms of the air, car, and hotel and flights that people are actually booking and taking, how that actually process is happened and how that actual process is searched and booked and how different offers are customized for individuals based off of their needs. There's quite a dramatic change happening in that space that we'll start to see over the next decade quite easily. Another trend that we're starting to see a bit of traction on, probably a little bit more towards the end of the next decade, would be around wearables and augmented reality. There's been a lot of newfangled technology in that space to help out and really improve that, but this is something that we'll start to see hit home in the travel space probably a bit more concretely in the latter part of the decade. And then the last trend that I mentioned is around biometrics, specifically around simplifying the travel process. We're starting to see more airports, more airlines, more different types of providers find that the security process is probably the most challenging part of the overall journey, and there's different ways to actually use biometrics to identify travelers and move them through the queues quicker. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Kim and we'll close out the webinar.
Thank you, John, for that very fascinating look at what's in store for us in 2020 and beyond. So due to time zone limitations, we are unfortunately unable to take live questions on today's webinar. However, if you have any questions on technology trends or would like more information on what FCM is doing in the tech space, you can contact your FCM account manager directly, or we will have a question form in the post-webinar email that you will receive in the next few days. So thank you all for attending today's presentation. We hope you've enjoyed it and we look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar.